Hey there, how you doing? It's Stephanie from the Quilter's Planner, and today I'm hanging out in my sewing room, and I thought it would be fun if I showed you how to sew the February block for our block of the month pattern. I'm going to show you how to make flying geese using our block of the month pattern. So if you already have your Quilter's Planner, just grab your magazine. Here it is. Have it right here. Open it up to page 28, I think, and we are going to sew together. If you don't already have your copy of the Quilter's Planner and the pattern magazine with all 14 patterns and our block of the month, then go to quiltersplanner.com and you can still get your copies. So turn to page 28 in your magazine and let's get your fabric ready. You need a fabric A and a fabric B, both cut to 7 1/4 inch, and you need 8 4x4 background squares that you're going to be using to make your 4 Time Geese. I am going to take 2 of the small white background squares and place them on the corners of the big squares. And try and get your corners to line up nicely, and then kind of make a switch here. And then we're going to do the same thing, right sides together on your fabric. Okay, and we're going to pin in a few minutes, but I'm going to mark first because when I pin before I mark, the pins always get in the way. So I've changed my orientation of my block so it's straight up and down, and I'm going to draw a line through the center diagonally. This is going to be our cut line. I'm using friction pens that erase when you iron them, just for drawing my seam lines. I don't like to use them for the front of my quilt or anywhere where they could be visible because they can return when your quilt gets cold. So here's my next line, which is a 1/4 inch away, sewing line, and then I'm going to turn everything carefully so I don't mix up move my fabrics, and then I'll add one more line a 1/4 inch away from that center cutting line. Okay, and I'm going to put a couple of pins in to keep everything from shifting when I go over to my sewing machine. You could probably get away with just putting 2 on either side there, on the right side or on the left side, but I think I'll put in a couple more. Okay, and I am going to go sew right here on this line and right here on this line. Not sewing on the center line. That's going to be where we cut. As an alternative, you can make your sewing marks on all 8 of those little background squares before you place them on top of your 7 1/4 inch feature fabric squares. And that's a little bit easier, a little bit less finicky. All right, finished sewing these 2. You can see the seam line, well, you can see it nice and clear on the back of this one. I'm going to cut down the center line now to create 2 units from each of those single units. And let's start with this one, which is my fancy fabric. I didn't press yet because I wanted you to be able to see those lines. There's 2 and 2 more. And then I'm going to take them over to my pressing table, and I am going to press these open like this. And they always look like little foxes to me after I have done that, okay? I will be right back and I will show you what these look like when these 4 are pressed open. Here's what we have after pressing, and I try and press gently. I told you before that that is my weakness as a quilter, so try and press and not iron. Do as I say, not as I do, okay? And now we're gonna move on to the next step. We are on step 1C now, in case you got lost. You're going to grab 4 more of your little background triangles, and you are going to place them just like this. We have great pictures in the magazine, so it should help you along with the video. And you're going to draw your lines again for cutting and sewing. It's a repeated theme, right, in all of these patterns. So it is an important skill to get. So we're going to go 1 right down the center, and then a 1/4 inch on either side. Let's pin before we go over to the sewing machine so nothing moves out of place. And I also want to remind you, we talked about this in the previous video, whenever you're sewing flying geese or half square triangles and you're looking for a scant quarter inch seam, try and sew just on the inside of the line that you drew, just a hair closer to that center cutting line. And that's going to be more of a scant quarter inch seam. It's going to give you a little bit more room when you're all done to trim your geese to get them just right. To sew the scant quarter inch, you want your needle to just be a thread's width over, closer to your cutting line, so you see it's kind of right on the inside. And then switching sides to the other sewing line, it's just on the inside of the line, slightly closer to the cutting line. We have these sewn up and we're going to now cut down the middle again. Let's move these other guys out of the way so they don't get cut. And here we go. One. When that happens, you start to wonder if you need to change your blade on your rotary cutter. Okay. 2. 3. 4. All right, we are going to press these open and you're going to see some flying geese start to appear. You should end up now with 4 of each of your 2 colors, okay? I'll press them and let's see. Before I do anything else, I want to measure and see if they are the correct size. They should be 3.5 inches by 6.5 inches or a little bit bigger. If your geese are too small, I think probably what has happened is that you have not sewn with a scant quarter inch seam allowance. Your seam allowance is probably too fat. So what you would do, I'm going to tell you a quick fix cheat. Use your seam ripper, rip off this top triangle, rip off the other one, go back to your sewing machine, place the triangle just like this, line up this bottom one and let it hang over the top, and go back and sew a more scant quarter inch seam allowance. And then you're going to open that up and put the other one on top. Really, this one was sewn first. And then you'll sew again. Just reapply your triangles. It's not the end of the world, and it's really easy to do, and it's a quick way to fix your seam allowance if somehow you didn't sew on the inside of the lines that you drew. So let's check this one and see. I have a ruler here that is 3.5 by 18 inches, and so I'm going to lay it down on my goose unit, and I can see that I do have at least 3.5. I have a little bit of an overhang. But before you trim that, there's something else important that you need to check. With the bottom of your goose and the top of your goose, your bottom of the goose at their 3.5 mark, I want you to put the quarter inch mark of your ruler right at the tip, the point of your flying goose, and make sure before you trim that you have at least 1/4 of an inch there, or 1/4 of an inch exactly, not at least. And when you place that tip at the 1/4 inch mark, I want you to also point the tip at the 3.25 inch mark. If you look, you can see 1, 2, 3 there. You see where the tip of my stiletto is pointing? That is 3.25 inches, and that means that the tip is nicely centered. And that's an important thing too before you cut on the left and the right. I have the bottom of the ruler at the bottom of the block, and this side is flush, and this side is at the 6.5 inch mark. My 1/4 inch dotted line is right there at the tip of the triangle, and it looks like that, yes, I do have room to slice off a little bit of that edge. So I'm going to do that right now, and this is just how I trim without any specialty rulers. 1/4 inch, slice, and I'm going to go ahead and trim off these dog ears on the side. But I really don't, on this block, I don't have more to trim off. My block really turned out to be exactly 6.5 inches. If you're like me, you may have tons of different rulers that you've collected, and you might be using something different. If you have a square ruler lying around, you can take advantage of the 45-degree line. Line up that 45-degree line with your diagonal seam. Make sure that your quarter of an inch is above that top point and that it's centered at 3.25 inches, and then trim on both sides that are showing, that are hanging over the edge. Then flip it around and do it again on the other two sides. One other ruler option is to use a thicker ruler that may be like 6.5 by 24 inches, and in that case you want to use a couple of other landmarks. Look where my stiletto is pointing here. It's at the diagonal seam. You see that the vertical and the horizontal 1/4 inch marks are hitting right at the diagonal seam on the 1/4 inch. And on the other side, the left side, where my stiletto is pointing, the diagonal seam is hitting right at the 6.25 inch and 1/4 inch intersection. That's really going to make sure that when you join these flying geese to the next block or to the next geese unit, that you're going to hit those points exactly. We have 8 trimmed geese, and we are going to now flip them over. I like to lay them out on my board so I can have them exactly in the right placement. It makes it easier when I'm sewing them together. This is my favorite of all the tips. Make sure you're sewing your geese together in the right direction, and put the second geese, in this situation it's the dark geese, on top. And that way I can see the seam that I've already sewed, the point of my triangle. Let's look more closely at this. Look at my stiletto again. You can see my seam line, that pink line, and the triangle, which is the point. If my seam line is to the right of that point, when I open them up, I'm going to have a perfect tip of the triangle. Yay, we're almost done. Now we need to sew the 2 top squares together, and we're going to use the same trick that we used before. Put the second block on top of the first, and you can see exactly where your points are, and then you can make sure that you don't sew over them. So check out my stiletto. I'm pointing right to the area there where the point of my triangle exists. So I want my seam to be just a thread to the right of that intersection. And then I will end up with perfect points after I sew that seam on. And make sure you've also pressed your block open so you can see that. Pressing our seams open here to reduce bulk. There are a lot of seams coming to meet in the center of this block, so it's not the ideal block to use the glue basting method I've shown you in the previous video. Now you have the top half of your block sewn, and we need to check and make sure it's the right size. It should measure 6.5 by 12.5 inches now. So I'm going to get my big ruler out, and let's just double check that we're really at 6.5 inches. It looks like here I have a little bit hanging over on that. See the left side there? Just a tad hanging over, and it looks like that's most likely kind of a pressing error. Maybe I got a little too zealous in my ironing instead of just pressing. So I just have a tiny area there to trim off to get the entire length of the block to be 6.5 inches. And I promise I will change my rotary blade as soon as I'm done with this block. Again, when your bottom portion of your block is sewn, take a second, make sure you're at 6.5 inches by 12.5 inches. All right, so it's time to join our top and our bottom. Remember, we have a lot of seams coming into this very center point here, so I want to make sure that I line this center seam up perfectly. Pull the top down, check out our cute little checkerboard. That shows me I'm lined up properly, and I'm going to flip it back over and put a pin right into this seam. And then I'm going to follow up with a whole bunch of other pins, and pin to the left and the right and really all the way down the seam line. It's worth the extra time and the extra pins for this particular join. Yay, we're all done with this beautiful block. If you didn't love this flying geese method, don't worry, there's plenty other options for you. I'm going to share with you in a separate video how to do the wing clipper method and also how to do the triangles on a roll method. So make sure that you subscribe to this channel and click the little bell button so you are sure to get an alert when new videos are downloaded. Please give me a thumbs up if you found this helpful, and if you'd like to comment below and let me know other questions that you have, other videos you'd like to see, that would really help me out. And I will see you in our Facebook group or on Instagram, and I thank you for sewing along with me. Bye!